According to the MBTI manual, INFPs make up 4.3% of the population, making this type the 9th most common of 16 in the U.S. population. INFPs are known for appearing sensitive, kind, original, and complex. They prize genuineness, respect for the needs of individuals, and human growth, and they use these skills to help themselves and others find and grow into their paths in life. This is most easily accomplished in areas where expectations and procedures are flexible and in line with the INFP's values and where creativity is encouraged. INFPs generally excel in areas and tasks that hold personal meaning for them and where there is room for exploration. Despite their appearance of going with the flow and living in the moment, INFPs often love to develop long-term visions for the future. As family members and friends, INFPs are typically extremely perceptive of the needs of their family members, and they are often adept at finding solutions that meet the needs of everyone. They tend to be extremely committed to their loved ones, and they may find it difficult to leave strained relationships.
Yeah.
Welcome to Personality Playbook. I'm Sadie Young.
And I'm Kayla Whittle.
And if you haven't noticed, today we're talking about INFPs. And in the interest of full disclosure, this is INFP Take 2.
Yes, we tried this once, and now we're going to try again.
So, I think we mentioned in our INFJ video that we decided to do we were kind of going in the order in which we think people are interested in type. Mm-hmm. We decided to do NFs first, and I don't think we realized how hard that was going to be.
Yeah.
Because we tried to do INFP right after INFJ, and we found that they were similar, that even though we both know a bazillion INFPs, we sat here going, duh.
Yeah, there's lots of crickets in our mind. We said, we're going to scrap that.
Yep.
And try again. Here we are.
Well, probably the footage we had some good footage and we had some good conversation.
Sure.
We're trying to give an introduction to INFPs here. And I think what we ended up coming up with last time was more specialty INFP material.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it was definitely good, and I think we'll show it to you at some point, but it's, we're going to try to give you more of an intro. And this time I wrote some slightly better note that we don't go brain dead. Wish us luck.
Or just on a million bunny trails, because we are both NFs.
I know.
And we will do that.
NF times NF equals infinity bunny trail. Yes.
Exactly.
In fact, they multiply like bunnies.
Yeah. Not to worry, we sprinkled more breadcrumbs this time. We will stay on the trail.
We'll see. We have been mentioning the type dynamics for the different types, and I'm going to continue to do that, even though we haven't put out the video on type dynamics yet, but that is coming. It's all up here. We've been talking about, our last two videos were on INFJ and ENFP, and those were NF types that are dominant intuitive. Mm-hmm. When we start talking about INFPs and then also ENFJs, we switch to dominant feeling. And when we say dominant, without explaining type dynamics, I'll just say your dominant preference is the one that's in charge.
Yeah.
I kind of like to think about it as a president and a vice president.
Sure. And what's observable and visible to others, I think is really key when you're thinking of what's dominant, right? Like what we present with.
Well, now with introverts,
that's true.
The president works inside.
Inside.
Yeah. And with extroverts, the president works outside.
Yes.
But with introverts, the person that works inside is running the show.
Yeah.
Like I said, if that doesn't make sense, we'll get more into it. But just know that with INFPs, feeling is running the show. Mm-hmm. And for INFPs, that feeling is introverted on the inside. Mm-hmm. Their vice president, also known as the auxiliary preference, is extroverted intuition. With this type, you see the intuition. Mm-hmm. That's what they present to the world. But in this case, that is the vice president. That's the backup guy.
Sure.
And when you notice, I'm sure that people... It probably sounds a little sinister sometimes that I write in the descriptions, these people appear, and you'll notice I say that in all of them. They appear flexible.
Right.
that's because that's what you're seeing. On the inside, they may be more stubborn than I am.
Right. Yeah, because of those values, right?
Exactly.
So INFP is a key feature of an INFP is that they're going to hold very closely to their values.
Exactly.
And those are very individualized because when you're an INFP, then you're going to like the free flow and treating individuals as individuals and seeing them for their needs, and the types of values that you're going to adopt in your life are going to reflect that.
Right.
But you're going to hold them really dear.
Yes.
Those values.
Yeah, those are deep, but if you run into one, you'll see it.
You'll notice. Yeah, for sure.
Just to give you the third and fourth preferences, which these are preferences that do matter quite a bit, but they're not what you're going to see on a day-to-day situation with a healthy person, at least.
Right.
We got that word tertiary again, that is a fancy word for third. INFPs have tertiary sensing and inferior extroverted thinking. That we're going to leave for a while. I'm not going to get into that right now. We have these words for all of the types. The adjectives that we have for INFPs are idealistic, flexible, creative, which I think is on all of the NFs, caring, and Kayla added, in case because I usually did 4, but Kayla added on take 1, she added calming.
Yes.
Because they do have...
Yeah, when they're healthy.
Slash in a good mood.
Yeah, or in a good mood.
They can be healthy in a bad mood.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been around someone who just kind of has that calming presence.
Yeah.
But I'm an ENFP, very close to an INFP, but not. You know what I mean? Like It is, but it isn't. And I think a key feature in an ENFP is that there's like enthusiasm, right? Like when things are good and positive. And when things are good and positive for an INFP, there's a chill, there's a calm presence, like some peace.
Right. Yeah. And also, and that's an interesting piece because with an ENFP and an INFP, in both of those people, you see intuition. That's what's on the outside for both of you. But for you, that's the person in charge. It's more of a what you see is what you get situation with introverts and with INFPs in particular.
Right.
You're seeing that intuition, but
complex.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Yeah.
There's layers of that happening and some like internal back and forth, right?
Right.
Before this is what's delivered out.
Yeah. You really have to do something as far as relationship or, conflict or something like that with an INFP to get to that boss.
Right.
Like you have to be sent to the principal's office because the principal's not walking around in the bus area.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that's good. And I think it's interesting. I had a client recently say, I don't care until I care. And I thought that was really good. And that's what I'm thinking of now as we're talking about INFPs is they do seem really flexible. And then they say like, I don't mind, like that sounds good, or let's do this, or you would like that. They are really flexible.
Yeah.
Until they care.
Right.
And then when the opinion is right. And then when the opinion is strong, is like, hey, I'm flexible. Hear me now, because I'm telling you that this is butting up against a value that I have, or this is a strong opinion that I carry. And it's like, I don't care until I care.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, this kind of brought to my mind just then.
Well, and one thing Kayla and I were talking about that I think is really important to talk about with feeling versus thinking is the fact that thinking is logic, and logic, I mean, if you really have logic, if you're one of those people who, it could be different, but for the most part, logic is logic is logic.
Right.
I consider logic to be related to math.
Yeah. Consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Values. Your value can be that you want everybody around you to feel comfortable and loved. Or your value can be that if somebody does something to you, you get revenge.
Yeah.
And they're both values.
Right.
But those are very different looking people.
100%.
Feeling types can really have a tremendous amount of range in what that looks like.
Right. I think oftentimes when we're talking about feeling types, it's like you get these different like mental pictures or visuals when you think about feelings, and it's like the little puppy with like the big pretty eyes, a little tear coming out, but feelings are like, it's a broad range, right? There's anger and there's disgust and there's fear and anguish and right. Like there's all of these different emotions that exist. And all of those emotions are key features in feeling types, not just the nice, pretty, kind, soft.
You have to say it.
Unicorns and rainbows emotions. Yeah, it's not always that like idealistic view of like being a feeler. Like it sounds good when we say the words, right? It sounds really pretty, but it's not always pretty, right?
Yeah.
As an F, sometimes that anger is in the driver's seat for me.
Yep, or sadness or depression.
Sadness, because that emotion, I step into that emotion to make my decisions.
Right.
And sometimes it's good and nice and kind and rainbows and unicorns. And sometimes it's, the little anger guy from Inside Out with the flames coming off the top of his head.
But I love him.
I love him.
Okay, I sound like Joy, don't I? Yay,
anger's fun. Who serves a great purpose.
Yes, he does. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important thing to think about.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I think something also to point out is that values are very, very different from personality.
They are.
Right?
Yes.
So people could be joined together as friends because they share very similar values and have very different personalities.
Well, like you and Chad.
Yeah. Chad and I are married and our values are very much in alignment and our personalities are literal opposites, right? Like if we look at it. So I think it's also important just to talk through that a little bit.
Sure.
And when she was discussing kind of the difference in when you're a logic or you're a thinker and there's consistency there because logic is logic, right? But feeling types, those values are separate from personality.
They really
which
are.
is why an ENFP with Christian values versus an ENFP that was raised to be like, we don't play like that. You know what I mean? Like that becomes a value, right? Then those are going to appear totally different for lots of different reasons. Right.
And don't you want to make a movie about them meeting?
100%.
I totally want to see what that looks like.
They would love and appreciate each other and then also butt up against each other.
Exactly. Aw, and then they end up finding value in the other. What a great movie. I think you can see, we talk about INFPs forming deep connections and friendships. And also, I can't not talk about counselors when I talk about INFPs because when we worked at the counseling center, most of the people that worked there, I think that had to have been the most common type. I mean, we had lots of NFs in general, but and we had some SFs and a couple of NTs. We didn't have any STs when I was there. Yeah, but for sure, INFPs ran the place, and were the most common counseling type. That for me, that being able to sit in the funk with someone in a counseling situation and have that deep relationship. And even for me, I'm thinking about my counselor, Stacy, that I've mentioned on here before, is an INFP. I almost said was. She's still around. She's just not my counselor anymore. But, I think about that great connection that we had that allowed us to cry in 1 minute and laugh in the next. Right. And all of that felt appropriate, even though sometimes we laughed about things that weren't really funny, but you got to laugh. And if you haven't noticed, that's my MO anyway, is just laugh. Well,
and sometimes it's, sometimes you can find humor in some
in some really messed up things.
Like, I don't know.
But she even used to tell me, I remember her, when we were talking about INFPs, she used to tell me, she was like, those values, those feelings, those are deep. And, I don't let anybody get to those. They either get there on accident and wish they hadn't, or like we're really having a deep, serious conversation. And I have trusted you enough to let you into that place.
Right. Well, and for some INFPs that might not even realize what those beliefs are, those values are, and how they're using that as a mechanism to go through life, right? That's like when I'm counseling an INFP, that's a really cool space where we're like, hey, these beliefs really matter to you. And they might not even be aware of all of them.
Sure.
Like some of them, sure, they're going to be aware of like, oh, wow, I really do value that.
Yeah.
Those are kind of cool, like little awakening moments you can have in the counseling room with an INFP.
For sure. And we mentioned that they appear flexible. And, I also think of that once again with Stacy. She was the one that always used to tell me about, I painted part of that wall 5 years ago and I'm going to get to the rest of the room anytime now. And I still have that bucket of paint sitting here and it's ready to go.
Yeah.
And, she knew that that was a part of herself,
right.
and that she probably was never going to finish it. But the intentions are lovely,
yeah.
and it is a nice, flexible thing. And it's all fun. So, I definitely mentioned with the counseling piece, the deep relationship, but they're also, I mentioned sitting in that stuff, but they're really good at meeting people wherever they are.
And non-judgmental.
Yeah.
Right? Like, hey, this is you and that's me and we're just sitting here together.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you've ever been to counseling before, for most people, I think there's something that you're going, she's going to think I'm terrible for this one thing, or something along those lines. And INFPs are just, they're going, where are you and where do you,
Yeah.
And the J in me wants to say, where do you want to go? And that's not what an INFP would say. They just say, all right, here we are. And we'll start. And we'll see.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent thing. They don't have the same expectations of where they're going to end up. They're not beginning with the end in mind. They're beginning with the journey.
Not surprising then that personality type would be drawn to counseling.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That definitely
it's almost
makes
like
sense.
expanding the way that you walk through the world internally as an INFP. It's like expanding that into a counseling room and teaching other people that space that's special to you. You like expand that space, invite someone in and teach them how to do that.
Yeah.
It's a cool thing. It's a cool thing. It's like this kind of like magnification of the personality type from a micro level to like, hey, let me open this up and show you how to do it. Right. Not that the counselor is giving their inner world, right?
Yeah.
But they're just showing like how the layers of that work.
Sure.
Which is really neat.
It is really neat. And they do have a way, whether they're in counseling or out of counseling, generally, as long as INFPs are, in a good place, in a good mood, they have a way of making things fun.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like part of that is because they're not committed to, we have to be, Jay's not really the most fun thing. And Kayla says nothing because it's true. Jay can be kind of a bummer. It
can get some stuff done.
It can.
But maybe not that fun.
Yeah. Well, it happens.
My kid, can I pause just for a minute?
Sure.
My husband's an ISTJ. I'm an ENFP. My kids recently said that he was the fun parent.
No way.
And I just really, it's just
no
taken me
offense,
a really
Chad,
long
but no
time.
way.
It's just really taken me a long time to move through that. Just,
oh my gosh. That's almost like when I found out that one of our dogs was half Chihuahua and I didn't know if I liked him anymore.
Exactly.
I was like, you're not who I thought you were.
What are children talking about? And
By definition,
and then
I'm
my
fun.
anger feeling came in. And I was like, I am the fun one. Can't you see?
Don't you know that ISTJs are literally sticks in the mud? Yeah, I'm looking at Ben over there.
Yeah. No, anyway, no, it's just funny.
That's kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'll be
They'll take it back one day.
I'll be a reference that you're fun.
Thank you.
If you need me to.
I appreciate that.
I have no problem with that. So yeah, I definitely think that fun thing is great. Certainly we allude to the fact that, I guess we do just have to say it because we all have this other side. So
sure,
I think for INFPs, when they're in a bad place or when you run into one of those values in the wrong way, then they can definitely be grumpy, angry.
Yeah.
More adjectives needed.
Yeah.
Kind of obstinate.
Yeah, obstinate. Gosh, my mind is blanking on the right way to say that. But
I know how it feels. I've been in the midst of it before, but the word,
right.
There
where
are words.
It's like, hey, this is way too important for me to just coast on through.
Yeah.
And I think maybe one of the hardest parts is that they don't care until they care.
Right.
And not only are you dealing with the fact that they've butted up against something that they have a really strong opinion about, but it's also shocking to a person who has lots of interactions with them who says, this isn't who you are.
Right.
Right. But it is.
Where's my fun, flexible buddy?
Exactly. And it's like, what in the world? Just, you know,
I think you might be a dragon. Yes.
Right. I think the shock factor is equally as hard as understanding what the value or belief is that's been butted up against. Right. Like, because it's like, I thought I understood my INFP friend. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden here we are, and someone was bad to the waitress at a restaurant. Mm-hmm. And the INFP is like, do not speak to them that way. Like,
exactly.
You know, and you're like, yes. Right? Because there's just this like calming, flexible, kind presence. And that's the person that you know, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. But like, if that, I just made up something random.
That makes sense.
But if that is an example of that, then they will absolutely like use their voice.
Right.
And say, this is not okay.
Almost like you think you've been talking to the principal the whole time, but it turns out the vice principal's the friendly one, and you got called to the principal's office and got a talking to.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And really, I think a lot of times related to injustice of other people, which is why I brought up the waitress. You know what I mean? Like as that incident, I was kind of specific with that. Because an INFP does see individuals and value and right, like, and care
that's
for people.
that NF thread.
That NF thread that's there. And a lot of times if those values are going to be something that gets butted up against and that they feel like they need to defend, it might be defending an oppressed population or like fighting for social justice or just an individual who wasn't treated fairly. They'll, you know what I mean? Like they'll kind of like.
Yeah, and they may have a different niche of where that goes.
Yeah, whatever that looks like, yeah.
For NFs in particular, we tend to be kind of social justice-y. You know, like maybe sometimes, I know about INFJs, people always say, we won't really, if you attack us, we won't really defend ourselves, but if you attack somebody else, we're coming after you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think largely that's an NF kind of a deal.
Quality. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also important to point out that when INFPs are males, right? Because that happens. Right?
I know. I should do the percentages of males versus females, because the males are going to be more rare. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but the males are going to be more rare than the females for sure with NFs.
A couple of things come to mind as we talk about an INFP male specifically. Number one, if you look at the societal ideal for men, you know, if we're talking in terms of Myers-Briggs, they are opposing each one of the preferences of what society says a man.
Particularly in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yes.
ESTJ would be this like
the ideal male type. Yeah, that's who you think about as being a stereotypical leader. You know, like a bank president. I always
get like a military vision in my head.
For sure.
Like
a general, not a private.
For sure.
But although they have to be privates first, and we'll get into that later. But the ones that make it through the part where they have to listen to other people and then get to the top.
Right.
I think this is the part where in our last attempt at this video, I was talking about tie breaking.
Yes.
With Myers-Briggs. And I do think that's important in this particular piece of the conversation. So, there was a time back in the 1800s. No, I'm kidding. Myers-Briggs isn't quite that old. There was a time where you did Myers-Briggs on paper. That's still possible, but it's not how most people do it. And at the end, they would basically add up your answers. And there were even numbers of questions that went in either direction with either preference. It was actually possible to tie on being an extrovert, introvert. You actually could get the exact same number of questions for each of the sets of preferences. The reason that they split things up and showed that ESTJ was the most favored type in the United States, at least for a man, and that INFP was the opposite, they actually used that as the tiebreaker. The assumption was that if you tied, it was because you actually were the unfavored set of preferences, the INFP, but that society had pulled you more towards EST and J because that was the ideal type in society. They would kick you over to INFP if you tied in that way.
Because the societal pressure is what was being displayed in the assessment if you were strongly on the other side. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important thing to point out. But, even if we don't have the assessment to tell us those things, society does tell men how they need to be.
Yes.
And calming, flexible, kind, and creative aren't necessarily on that list, right? And because they have this feeling sense that's important, and society says kind, calm, unicorns and rainbows feelings are for girls, then very often for long periods of time, an INFP male can function out of what are the safe male emotions? Anger, upset, frustration, and then trying to display dominance regarding their values from a society that says you need to display dominance like an ESTJ, which if this is sounding really messy, it's really messy.
It's really messy.
Right? And then I can tell you, like, sitting in the counseling room, it's moving mountains to get a male INFP who's been trying to figure out where the place, like what lane can I drive in? Do you know what I mean? For years and years and years to sit down and say, no, this is really where I'm at. Like, this is what's going on. And how can I be this in a world that says I should be that?
You're essentially attempting to live as your opposite. And because it's your opposite, you're not good at it.
Yeah. It comes off weird. It comes off maybe harsh, right? Because a standard ESTJ is not going to use the emotion. It's going to be very logical, right?
Exactly.
But an INFP trying to be an ESTJ or in any of those parts
is going to look super bossy.
Yeah, because they're going to use that emotion to make that to make things happen, right?
And instead of being directive,
right,
they're oppressive.
Yes. It can be really hard to be an INFP male.
Sure.
But I will say, on the other side of that, like when that recognition comes into place, this is who I am, right? I have really been feeling the need to be something that I'm not for a long time. And they can really understand, appreciate, and like settle into. It's a really cool thing.
And you just have to imagine how much of a relief it has to be, because it takes much energy to walk around pretending to be somebody you're not.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I love most about Myers-Briggs, is that it allows you to relax into who you are, that you can then work from that space on actual problems.
Yeah.
Because your personality type is not a problem.
Right.
It's who you are.
It's who you are. And that's it, and it's not a gender thing, and it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's literally just these preferences, that like these natural preferences that we have, and being able to say, hey, your natural preferences are okay.
Exactly.
And that's broad. That's not just speaking to, this INFJ ESTJ thing. Obviously we're talking about INFP and ESTJ. I said that wrong. But this conversation that we're having, I think we're always going to land in some shape or form here. But I think it's just a standout in the conversation about an INFP male.
Sure. And because when you see those qualities in a female,
right, they're a little more socially acceptable.
Yeah, they're definitely acceptable, because you see, women are expected to be warm and kind and all of those things.
And nurturing.
Exactly. And INFPs tend to be that way.
Yeah.
Even though there's no extroversion, that tends to be
it's like the proverbial big tough guy in the movie who you meet and they like to,
they're a big teddy bear
or something. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Or like I always think of like Tangled, where she's like she's in the tavern with all of those ruffians, I think is what she calls them. Ruffians.
New word. Love it.
Yeah. And she starts singing, because she's very obviously an ENFP, by the way.
Okay.
Rapunzel in the
Of course, I haven't seen
100%. She goes into a tavern, knows no one, and starts singing a song about, I've got a dream. He's got some dreams, right? And so it's like you see it, you're like, oh, wow, okay. And then all of these guys come out and they're like, actually, I collect ceramic unicorns. And I, you know what I mean? Like, that's what the whole scene's about. It's what's making me think of, you know, that there's like freedom whenever somebody says like, hey, you get to be who you were created to be.
They're the super loving biker guys with all the tattoos and the kids that look like they're going to kill you. Yeah.
Yes.
I love those guys.
Yeah.
That's always fun. I feel like we've pretty well covered most of the stuff. We did mention here, just looking at the notes that we have, they tend, when it comes to work, these are, and we're going to end up covering careers later for each of the types, but I couldn't not say in here that they look for creative autonomy and they have to have meaning in their work. Once again, data entry is out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No data entry for
no. They hence the counseling, hence, you know, I think nursing and some of those kinds of careers, they need to have micromanaging is not going to work for an INFP. Being told that you have to do things according to an SOP is going to be, you know, everybody has a little bit of that, but if that's most of the work, that's going to be incredibly difficult for an INFP. Right.
I think of like a hospice worker.
Yeah.
Right. Like places like that.
Oh, I mean, that's a gift. If you get an INFP who's a hospice worker.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with that being said, that wraps us up for our second attempt at the introduction to INFP.
Right.
And we
didn't even talk about Jesus, though. That's the only thing.
We didn't talk about Jesus. Yeah, we were saying in our previous video that I used to have an argument since I'm an INFJ, and the guy who, Jerry, who directed the counseling center where we used to work, was an INFP. He and I always used to debate whether Jesus was an INFJ or an INFP.
Yeah.
Now, I will fully admit that I am wrong. He's not an INFJ, but it was a really fun thing to argue about.
Yeah, it was a good sparring match for sure.
It was. You know, I can make a case for it even though I'm wrong.
Yeah.
That's the intuitive way.
Fight to the death. Yes. Even when we know that we probably don't have good ground to stand on.
Yeah.
But it's just fun sometimes.
It's just fun.
Yeah. It is good to know, though. INFP was Jesus. Good thing we waited till the end, too, that we don't want you INFPs to get your heads too big on the front end of this. Because you have the same type as Jesus.
Yeah. And I mean, you had to, you know, I always felt like when I read the INFJ celebrities, it's like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. And I'm going, no pressure. I always said I identify with Billy Crystal because he's a comedian. And I think I can maybe live up to that.
Let me tell you that ENFP celebrities are, it's not like, oh, look at that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, there we are. All the
don't like it, huh?
It's fine. Whatever.
Oh. And that was a genuine response, wasn't it?
Oh man. All right. Well, there we go. INFP.
There we go. INFP take 2. I think we did well this time.
We got it.
Woo! And cue the ninjas, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.